Alan Watts once said that we live our lives as if we're constantly preparing for something that never arrives. And nowhere is this more obvious than in how we speak to each other. Watch any two people meet. "Hi, how are you?" "Fine, thanks." "And you?" "Fine." A ritual so hollow it echoes. But here's what most people will never tell you, and what you absolutely need to hear before this ends: the words you're about to discover don't just change conversations. They change who people think you are at the deepest level. According to Alan Watts, we've confused communication with noise. We've mistaken talking for connection. And in that confusion, we've become a world of people desperately shouting into the void, wondering why no one ever truly sees us. But Watts discovered something profound in his studies of Eastern philosophy and human consciousness. He found that attraction, real magnetic pull between human beings, has nothing to do with what you say and everything to do with the space you create. Stay with me because what's coming will make you rethink every conversation you've ever had. Most people spend their entire lives trying to be interesting, trying to impress, trying to win. But Watts taught us something radically different. He showed us that the most magnetic people aren't those who perform. They're those who allow. And by the end of this, you'll know exactly how to become that person. The person others can't forget. The person others feel pulled toward without understanding why. Now, before I reveal the first phrase that transforms everything, let me ask you something. When was the last time someone looked at you and made you feel like your inner world actually mattered? Not your achievements. Not your appearance. But the chaotic, messy, beautiful complexity of what it feels like to be you. If you're struggling to remember, you're not alone. And that's exactly why this matters. Alan Watts discovered through years of exploring human consciousness that our deepest suffering comes not from being unloved, but from being unseen. He said we are not separate islands. We are waves in the same ocean, temporarily forgetting we are water. And when someone says to you, truly says, "I understand," what they're really doing is reminding you that you're not alone in this ocean. That your wave, your pattern, your experience is valid. According to Watts, understanding is not an intellectual exercise. It's not about agreeing or disagreeing. It's about recognition. When you tell someone, "I understand you," you're performing a kind of magic that most people have forgotten exists. You're saying, your reality is real. Your feelings make sense within the context of your experience. You are not crazy for being who you are. Here's what happens in the brain, and this is crucial. When someone feels understood, their nervous system literally relaxes. The stress hormone cortisol drops. The muscles soften. They move from a state of defense to a state of openness. And in that openness, something remarkable occurs. They become attached to you. Not because you manipulated them. But because in your presence, they experienced something rare. They experienced peace. Watts taught that we are always seeking the same thing, whether we know it or not. We're seeking to return home. To feel that we belong. That we're acceptable as we are. When you offer understanding, you become that home for another person. You become the place where they don't have to fight to exist. And people don't just like that feeling. They become addicted to it. They return to you again and again because you've given them what the entire world withholds: permission to be themselves. But here's the part most people miss, and I need you to catch this. Understanding requires you to shut up. It requires you to stop preparing your clever response. Stop trying to top their story. Stop waiting for your turn. Alan Watts said the ego is nothing but a chronic sense of muscular tension. And nowhere is that tension more obvious than in conversation. We're all so tight, so defended, so desperate to prove something. But the moment you release that tension, the moment you simply receive what another person is offering you, everything shifts. And this leads perfectly into something even more powerful, but I need you to stay focused because most people zone out right before they hear the thing that would have changed everything. Don't be that person. According to Alan Watts, one of the greatest human needs is to feel that our existence is reasonable. Not perfect. Not impressive. Just reasonable. We want to know that given who we are and what we've experienced, our thoughts and feelings follow a logical path. When you tell someone, that makes sense, you're giving them that gift. You're telling them, I see the path you walked. I see how you got here. And it's valid. Alan Watts said that most misery comes from the feeling that we shouldn't feel what we feel. Someone is anxious and they think they shouldn't be anxious, which makes them anxious about being anxious. Someone is sad and they judge themselves for being sad, which makes them sadder. But when you say, that makes sense, you interrupt that vicious cycle. You offer acceptance. And acceptance, what's taught us, is the beginning of all transformation. Think about your own life for a moment. When have you felt most at ease? Wasn't it in the presence of someone who didn't need you to be different? Someone who could hear your mess and not flinch? That's the person everyone is searching for. And here's the secret, you can become that person simply by recognizing others as they are. Now listen carefully. This isn't about fake agreement. Watts was obsessed with authenticity. He spent his whole life warning against spiritual phoniness, against people who performed wisdom without embodying it. So when you say, that makes sense, you must mean it. You must have actually listened. You must have actually followed their reasoning. Because people can sense pretense from a mile away. They can smell performance. But when your recognition is genuine, when it comes from real listening, it has a weight to it. A presence. And that presence is magnetic. According to Watts, we don't trust people who are trying to convince us of something. We trust people who are simply being with us. When you acknowledge that someone's perspective makes sense, even if you don't share it, you're showing that you're not there to convert them or correct them. You're there to meet them. And that meeting, that genuine encounter between two consciousnesses, is what creates connection. Here's what most people do wrong, and this might sting a little. They use these phrases as tactics. They read some article about persuasion and they go out and sprinkle, that makes sense, into conversations like magic fairy dust, wondering why it doesn't work. Alan Watts would have laughed at this. He'd say you're trying to use a spiritual truth as a psychological trick. And tricks don't work because people aren't stupid. They might not be able to articulate why you feel fake, but they feel it. Trust that. Now we're getting into dangerous territory, and if you're still here, you're about to learn something that will separate you from 99% of people who will never understand this. Stay with me. Alan Watts taught that the ego is an illusion. A useful fiction we create to navigate the world, but a fiction nonetheless. And nothing feeds the ego quite like being right. Nothing starves it quite like admitting someone else is right. Which is precisely why the phrase, you are right, is so devastatingly powerful. Because when you can say it sincerely, you prove that you're not enslaved to your ego. You prove that you care more about truth than about winning. According to Watts, the person who must always be right is a person in prison. They've trapped themselves in a tiny cell where they must defend every position, must never yield, must always be on guard. That's exhausting. And people can feel that exhaustion radiating from them. But the person who can say, you're right, with genuine ease, that person is free. And freedom is the most attractive quality a human being can possess. Think about arguments you've had. Really think about them. What were you actually fighting for? Were you fighting for truth? Or were you fighting to avoid the humiliation of being wrong? Alan Watts discovered that most conflict isn't about ideas at all. It's about ego protection. Two egos crashing into each other, both desperate not to be diminished. But here's the paradox: what's loved, the moment you're willing to be diminished, you become larger. The moment you're willing to lose, you win. When you tell someone, you're right, especially in a moment of tension, something extraordinary happens. The fight drains out of the room. The other person's defenses drop because they're no longer under attack. They no longer need to prove anything. And in that moment of surrender, paradoxically, they begin to respect you more, not less. Because you've demonstrated something rare, strength without rigidity. Confidence without arrogance. Alan Watts said that the highest form of human development is the ability to hold your beliefs lightly. To be committed to truth-seeking rather than to being right. And when people encounter someone who lives this way, they're magnetized by it. Because it's so unfamiliar. We live in a world of hardened positions, of people who would rather die than admit they were mistaken. But you're willing to bow. You're willing to acknowledge truth wherever it appears. And that willingness makes you unforgettable. But let's be clear about something, and this is vital. Watts wasn't teaching doormat philosophy. He wasn't saying you should agree with everything and everyone. He was saying that when someone genuinely has a point, when they're genuinely right about something, you should be big enough to acknowledge it. There's a vast difference between wisdom and weakness. Wisdom says, I was wrong about that. Weakness says, I'll agree with anything to avoid conflict. People are attracted to wisdom. They're repelled by weakness. And now we arrive at the foundation of everything I've told you so far, and if you miss this, nothing else will work. Are you still here? Good. Because this is where it all comes together. Alan Watts said that the highest form of communication is communion. Not the exchange of words, but the meeting of presence. And you cannot have presence without listening. Real listening. Not the performance of listening. Not the waiting for your turn listening. But the kind of listening where you actually disappear for a moment and let another consciousness flow into the space where you were. According to Watts, we have confused hearing with listening. Hearing is passive. Sounds hit your eardrums whether you want them to or not. But listening is active. Listening is an act of will. It requires that you set aside your agenda, your judgments, your preparations, and simply receive. And in our culture of constant noise, constant distraction, constant self-promotion, the person who can truly listen has become as rare as gold. When you say, I'm listening, and you actually mean it, you're offering something most people never receive in their entire lives. You're offering your full attention. Your undivided presence. Alan Watts taught that attention is love. Where your attention goes, your energy flows. And when you give someone your complete attention, you're giving them your life force. You're saying, in this moment, you are the most important thing in my universe. Here's what happens when people feel truly listened to, and neuroscience backs this up. Their brain waves begin to synchronize with yours. You enter a state of rapport so deep it's almost telepathic. They feel safe enough to go deeper, to share more, to reveal the parts of themselves they usually hide. And as they reveal themselves, they become more invested in the connection. Because vulnerability creates attachment. And you created the space for that vulnerability simply by listening. Watts discovered through his studies that most human suffering comes from isolation. Not physical isolation, but psychological isolation. The feeling that no one truly knows us. That we're walking through life wearing masks, playing roles, never fully seen. But when someone listens, really listens, that isolation dissolves. We feel real. We feel alive. We feel that our existence matters. Think about the people who've impacted your life most deeply. Were they the ones who talked the most? Or were they the ones who gave you space to talk? Who gave you room to think out loud, to feel out loud, to exist out loud without interruption or judgment? That's the person everyone is searching for. And it requires nothing from you except the willingness to be quiet. To be present. To let go of your need to be fascinating and simply let the other person fascinate you. According to Alan Watts, the reason we don't listen is because we're afraid. We're afraid that if we stop talking, if we stop performing, we'll disappear. We'll be nothing. But that's the ego talking. That's the illusion. The truth is that when you stop trying to be something, you become everything. You become spacious enough to hold another person's entire reality. And that spaciousness is what draws people to you like gravity. Now, before we land this, I need to show you how to begin. Because everything I've said is useless if you're still starting conversations like everyone else. And this technique, this one phrase, is going to feel uncomfortable at first. But that discomfort is exactly why it works. Alan Watts was obsessed with breaking patterns. He said we sleepwalk through life, repeating the same scripts, the same behaviors, never truly awake. And nowhere is this more obvious than in how we greet each other. Hi, how are you? Fine. The words are so automatic they're meaningless. They're not communication. They're just noise we make to acknowledge each other's presence, like dogs barking. But what if you broke the pattern? What if instead of falling into that tired ritual, you said something that actually required thought? According to Watts, the moment you interrupt someone's automatic pattern, you wake them up. You snap them into presence. And presence is where connection happens. So try this, tell me something good. Watch what happens. The other person pauses. They can't give an automatic response because you haven't asked an automatic question. They have to stop and think. They have to search their experience for something good. And in that search, something beautiful occurs. They shift their focus. They move from complaint mode, from stress mode, from automatic mode into gratitude mode. And you did that. You shifted their state with 4 words. Alan Watts taught that we become what we pay attention to. If you ask someone, "How are you?" they'll scan for problems. They'll tell you they're tired, stressed, busy. But if you ask, "Tell me something good," they scan for joy. They look for light. And by directing their attention toward the good, you've already made them feel better. You've already improved their day. And they'll associate that feeling with you. Here's the deeper magic, and this is what Watts understood about human psychology. When someone shares something good with you, they're sharing a part of themselves they don't usually show. They're being vulnerable in a different way. They're saying, "Here's what I care about. Here's what matters to me. Here's what brings me joy." And in sharing that, they open themselves to you. They create intimacy without even realizing it. According to Watts, most people never escape the surface level because they never give each other permission to go deeper. They stay trapped in polite conventions, in meaningless exchanges, in the prison of small talk. But you're offering an escape route. You're saying, "We don't have to do it that way. We can be real right from the start." And people are so starved for realness that when you offer it, they grab onto it like a lifeline. This isn't manipulation. Watts would have hated that. This is liberation. You're liberating yourself from boring conversations. You're liberating the other person from having to pretend everything is fine when it's not, or from having to hide their joy because it's not cool to be enthusiastic. You're creating space for authenticity. And authenticity, Watts taught us, is the only thing that's actually attractive. Everything else is just peacocking. So here we are. And if you've made it this far, you're already different from who you were when we started. Because you now understand something that most people will never grasp: attraction isn't about technique. It's about presence. Alan Watts spent his life trying to wake people up from the trance of everyday existence. He tried to show us that we're not separate beings competing for resources and attention. We're waves in the same ocean, temporarily forgetting we're made of water. And when you approach conversation from that understanding, everything changes. You're no longer trying to extract something from the other person. You're not trying to impress them or win them over. You're simply meeting them. Wave to wave. Consciousness to consciousness. According to Watts, the secret to a meaningful life is to stop postponing it. Stop waiting for the perfect moment. Stop preparing. Just be here now, fully present with whoever is in front of you. And these phrases I understand, that make sense, "You're right, I'm listening, tell me something good," these aren't tricks to memorize. They're invitations to presence. They're ways of reminding yourself to show up fully in the moment. Here's what Watts discovered that changes everything: you don't become attractive by trying to be attractive. That's backwards. That's the ego trying to manipulate reality. You become attractive by forgetting yourself. By becoming so absorbed in the other person, so genuinely interested in their reality, that your self-consciousness dissolves. And in that dissolution, your true nature emerges. And your true nature is what's attractive. Not the performance. Not the mask. But the real you, paying real attention to the real them. Think about water for a moment. Water doesn't try to be useful. It doesn't perform or pretend. It simply flows. It takes the shape of whatever container it finds itself in. It nourishes without effort. It sustains without demanding recognition. Alan Watts loved this metaphor. He'd say, be like water. Don't try to force connection. Don't try to manipulate outcomes. Just flow. Be present. Allow. And when you live this way, something miraculous happens. People are drawn to you without you trying to draw them. Conversations go deeper without you pushing them deeper. Connection happens naturally because you've created the conditions for connection. You've become the space in which others feel safe to be themselves. And safety, what's taught us, is the foundation of all love. So here's your challenge, your invitation, your opportunity. The next conversation you have, try this. Not as a technique. Not as a way to get something. But as an experiment in presence. Really listen. Really understand. Really acknowledge. Really meet the other person where they are. And watch what happens. Watch how their face softens. How their voice changes. How they lean in. How they open up. According to Alan Watts, the meaning of life is just to be alive. To be fully present in each moment. To experience the reality of your existence without the constant filtering of the ego. And nowhere is this more possible than in genuine human connection. When two people truly meet, when the masks fall away and presence meets presence, that's not just conversation. That's communion. That's what we're all searching for. That's home. You now have the words. But remember, the words without presence are nothing. They're empty shells. What gives them power is you. Your willingness to be real. Your courage to be present. Your decision to stop performing and start experiencing. Alan Watts would tell you that you already have everything you need. You don't need to become someone different. You just need to stop pretending to be someone you're not. So go forth. Speak these words with presence. Listen with your whole being. Understand without judgment. And watch as you become the person others can't forget. Not because you were clever. Not because you were impressive. But because in your presence, they finally felt like they could breathe. Like they could be themselves. Like they were home. That, my friends, is the art of magnetic presence. That is what Alan Watts discovered. That is what will change your life. The only question is, will you use it? Thank you so much for staying with me through this exploration. If you found value in today's discussion, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who might benefit from it.